Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I want to talk about JFK's missing brain. It's an interesting story, and there's a lot of thoughts and ideas of how it became missing. But I wanted to talk about a few things that I think make sense, to me at least, on how that brain vanished. Let's go through the whole story. First off, John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November the 22nd, 1963, in Dallas. He was shot in a motorcade. Before a few minutes, the whole world knew about it. I remember hearing about it. And he would die at Parkland Hospital after a great trial by the doctors trying to save him, which was kind of fruitless, but they tried. And so once he was declared dead, they needed a casket. And so a high-end funeral director in Dallas provided a very fancy casket to put the president in. Now, of course, the president was wrapped in towels and sheets, and there was a lot of blood everywhere. And so when he was put into the casket inside was stained all over with blood. But that's nonetheless. And so he was placed in there. They brought him to Air Force One in an ambulance. There was a big battle to get control of the casket also. And that's another story altogether. But they brought him to Air Force One, and the casket wouldn't fit in the doorway of Air Force One. And so they broke off the handles on the sides of it so it would fit through the door. And then it was brought back to Washington, basically by Maryland. And then, of course, the body was taken to what's it called? Bethesda Medical Center in Maryland. And there the autopsy was done. And the body was brought, it was taken out of the casket, and they worked on the body for about 3 hours, removing organs, removing the brain, doing tissue samples, doing blood samples, all kinds of stuff. And that was all put together. Now, after that was done, he was kind of sewed up and put back together to a degree, and then the embalmers came, and then they did a detailed job of putting him together for the time being. Since the brain wasn't in the head, they filled it with material and then fixed the hair so it covered everything. And then he was placed into a new casket. Now, this is the casket that all the memorials, all the funeral programs and everything else in which he lies in today. It was placed within a Wilbur vault and sealed and buried in Arlington Cemetery. Now, what to do with the old casket? Now, of course, the funeral director in Dallas wanted it back, and he wanted to be paid for it at least. And he was more inclined to get it back because it had become a big deal, and people had offered him a lot of money for it. And obviously, he was big on trying to get as much as he could out of the deal. And it was decided to put it into the National Archives, and the National Archives put it in the basement of the National Archives, along with a locker containing the brain, tissue samples, blood samples, organ samples, etc., and bone samples. This is how it was in 1964. In 1965, Robert Kennedy was strongly pushing to get rid of that casket. And he said to many people in government, how do we get past the red tape? I just want to get rid of it. And he stated that it would become a morbid curiosity piece in the future. and he said it should be removed. Now, this was in 1965. Finally, in February of 1966, everything was worked out where the casket could be removed. Now, here's what they did. The casket was placed into a bit of a case of holding it together. And, of course, several sandbags, heavy sandbags, were put into the casket, and the casket was locked, and then the case all around it was put together. And then it was taken by a C-130, about 90 miles off the coast of Washington, D.C., at 9,000 feet of water, and dropped and sank because there were holes in the caskets. In the casket's bottom, they put holes. And it was reported that when they dropped it, the casket just kept going, never came up. And that was all reported. Now, here's the interesting thing. In October, November of 1966, there was an inventory done of the cabinet containing the brain, the blood samples, the organ samples, etc., all the stuff I had mentioned, and it was found it was missing. Nobody seemed to know anything. And in 1967, John F. Kennedy is exhumed and moved several hundred feet to the present tomb in which he lies. Now, he was buried, but now he is entombed in a vault structure, just the right size to fit the coffin and vault in which he is placed in. Now, it was said by many people, that perhaps the brain was buried there with them. But no one is of a mind to remember the brain. The person in charge of Arlington has no information on it, since it's not a burial anymore. It's an above-ground entombment. It's a very different thing. So that was the thought, that perhaps the brain went there. But here's my thought. Robert Kennedy's big job as Attorney General, in many respects, was to clean up after his brother. He had to fix all the problems that his brother got himself into. If he had an affair with someone or whatever, he would threaten them and solve the situation. And he was also very keen to make sure that nobody knew what kind of drugs his brother was on. And as I mentioned, he was on a lot of drugs. He was on 18 different drugs, which is incredible. And of course, he was seeing Dr. Jacobson, who was giving him shots, stuff like that, and that caused a lot of problems too. In fact, one time he saw Dr. Jacobson, and he said, "I haven't seen you in a while, Doc. Why don't you give me 2 shots?" And the next thing that the Secret Service finds is John F. Kennedy comes running out of his stateroom naked, running down the halls, higher than a kite. And so they have to chase after the naked president. Now, here's the interesting thing. And the next floor is the press. That might have been absolutely incredible. And so they got him, and they gave him medication to calm him down, antidotes to the amazing drugs that he was being given by Jacobson. But all in all, there was a lot of drugs in his systems for many, many different things, many different problems in his system, weaknesses for this, that, and everything else. And also there were problems sexually. There were a lot of drugs given him for that as well. And so he would always clean up everything. So I'm thinking that Robert Kennedy wanted to preserve and protect his brother's legacy. How's the best way to do that? Get rid of the evidence. So it is my feeling that in February of 1966, not only were sandbags put into that casket, but the brain, tissue samples, organ samples, photographs, anything that could be compromising to show signs of the health or issues with the president. And I believe that that all went to the bottom of the ocean collectively. To me, it makes sense. And I'm not saying it in a criminal way for Robert Kennedy. I'm saying that he did it to protect his brother. Because he well knew that in time people would start researching and looking at the blood in the brain, and they'd come to realize that there's a lot of things going on here that no one was aware of. So that's my feeling about the whole thing, that the brain is at the bottom of the Atlantic, or the jar that the brain was in, and that it's never going to be found, and that John F. Kennedy is protected. But, we know most of the stuff now anyway. But at the time, I think it was a very, very different situation. And I think Robert Kennedy felt that that was the best way to save his brother's legacy. Well, that's about all I wanted to say. What do you think? I know it might sound a little harebrained, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And here's the thing, one other thing to mention. When they exhumed the president, there was the talk that perhaps the brain was removed, to put it where the body was being moved to. And that would make a lot of sense if it was being moved from the National Archives in 1967. But in October, November of 1966, the brain was already gone. What are you going to do with the brain for 5 months? That doesn't make any sense. That's why I think it's a very logical and plausible thing. The perfect way to get rid of evidence is put it in the casket and sink it in the Atlantic. Thank you.